Make sure that is working. Excellent. Okay, well, good morning or good evening, everyone, who, depending on where you're watching this from. My name is Jill Johnson. I'm the Executive Director for the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. We are thrilled today to have two of our members, our new members, Irma Ilaf, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes.
I should have asked this before I recorded. And Tarina, is it Goose?
Gusa.
Gusa, okay, both from the University of Pretoria in South Africa, both fairly new members to ISQOLS, and they presented at the ISQOLS 2019 Grenada conference. And we're just thrilled to have them present this in our ISQOLS webinar. This is which factors support student well-being at university. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. And if you guys wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about how you stumbled upon well-being and quality of life happiness research, and how you found ISQOLS and how long you've been part of ISQOLS. And with that, we'll go ahead and mute our microphones, Yvette.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Jill. Yes, well, I've been working with Graciela Tonen from Argentina on the development of the Handbook of Quality of Life Studies in African Societies for some years, when Tarina sent me an email telling me about the work of ISQOL and also the conference in Grenada. At the time, we were doing a large-scale student well-being study here at the University of Pretoria to look at the factors that support student well-being. And Tarina and me thought that this would be a good platform to go and talk about our work in Grenada. So that's how I came about becoming a member of ISQOL, and I've been very happy with this membership and the quality of the conference in Spain.
And thank you, Jill. Yes, I've been doing research on well-being, mostly from the positive psychology side, positive psychology associations and so forth. And through my interactions with other colleagues, I came to know about ISQOLS, and what really pulled me towards the conference and also becoming a member is the multidisciplinary nature of the society. In the beginning of my research career, I focused mostly on the psychological, and now I actually really appreciate and enjoy the more multidisciplinary view on quality of life studies.
Okay, so if it's okay, we can perhaps jump right in and start with our presentation, which is similar to the one that we presented in Grenada. This is a study that looks at the student well-being at a large residential urban university in South Africa, the University of Pretoria. This is a project that was done in 3 phases. We're currently busy with phase 3. So this presentation will be reporting on phase 1. I will be talking a little bit about the findings from phase 1, and Tarina will be talking about the findings from phase 2. So I'll be skipping through the first probably 10 slides very quickly, because that's the background of the study. So the next slide is the overview study, is the overview of the study. If you can flick to the next slide, and then also the background slide. Yes, background. And the next one, exploratory qualitative study. And then this one is the 3 phases. In the first phase, we did almost 2,500, 2,480 rapid interviews with students face-to-face on campus by student field workers themselves, where we asked them, what are the factors that support your well-being as a student at the university? Just one simple question in order to get their immediate responses, what were at the top of their mind if they think about that question. Then during phase 2, we conducted more in-depth focus groups by experienced researchers with different groups of students from all scientific fields at the university. And then in phase 3, we are looking at the existing well-being interventions that is being conducted in different domains at the University of Pretoria, and that's an ongoing part of this study. So the next slide is on the methods. The first one was rapid interviews, and then the second one was focus groups. We did, in order to do the phase 1 data collection, you can go to the next slide on field worker training. we trained groups of field workers from the helping profession. So this would be psychology students and social work students, and we train them on ethical research conduct, on the ways in which you collect data in social sciences, also the broad picture of wellbeing research in the world, and then being a field worker. So they were conducting the interviews in phase 1 with their peers. Okay, so next slide. This provides a question of the different campuses. The University of Pretoria has 7 different campuses, and data was collected on all the campuses: Health Sciences, Mamelodi campus, Greencliff campus, Hatfield campus. Next slide was what we called the rapid face-to-face interviews, where they asked the one question to the students. In some cases, the students were talking for 15 minutes and they gave us expansive answers. In others, they gave us 5 or 6 words listing the factors that they think support their well-being. The next few slides is the biographical details on the participants, where we were very lucky in terms of the representativity. This was fairly, well, this was random sampling because the field workers were walking around on campus, collecting data, asking students who were interested in the study to respond to the question. But we ended up with a very, very high representativity of the actual student body at the university, both in terms of the provinces that they came from, as well as their citizenship, most of them being from South Africa, but then also some of the SADC countries in Africa. And next slide. Similar also in terms of gender and age. And then the next slides, also in terms of race and language, and also the campuses in which the students were participating in the study. So fairly good representativity from this group of 2,480 students in comparison to the total population group of students at the undergraduate students at the university. So what did they tell us in phase 1? Well, there were different layers of findings from this mountain of data that we collected. You can go to the next slide on what students are telling us. That's the campuses, yes, the university. Next slide. Okay, so there were 2 dominant themes, which was actually quite surprising to us, and that was the quality of the learning environment. This was by far the strongest theme in the responses from the students, where they were mentioning the beauty of the campuses around them, the fact that they felt safe and secure, the fact that there were excellent facilities for excellent lectures to take place, for students to have time to just relax and socialize and be together. Simple things like access to Wi-Fi that made us realize that for many students in the African context, that's not something that they have access to on a daily basis. So the quality of the learning environment was mentioned by a preponderance of students in this study. And then the second dominant theme was around supportive and well-prepared lectures and staff. Students were mentioning those moments when a lecturer were really well prepared, conducting a lecture in a very profound way, and that the students were saying that this actually supports their well-being. And also then those moments when lecturers connect with them, ask them how they are doing, where it's the personal in the relationship that comes to the fore. So those were the 2 dominant themes. I won't spend too much time on the direct quotes, which is on the next slide, but it shows you the kind of responses that the students were giving. These are just some of the extracts from the data that we students talk about the environment. And then the next slide, when they talk about supportive and well-prepared lecturers and staff at the university, where they say this is really supporting our well-being. Then there was a second layer of what we almost called like secondary themes underneath the dominant themes. And so the next slide. And that was where students were talking about their safety and security, which is kind of profound because this is on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a very basic need, but the students were connecting this to a high need for well-being. Is they feel safe at the university. So this is a theme that we think needs further investigation, because is there too much perhaps of a contrast between their feelings of safety outside the university? Again, they mentioned infrastructure. They specifically mentioned the residences. We have a fairly extensive residence accommodation facilities at the university, and many students mentioned this as contributing to their well-being. Then also the academic and student support that was available. This is mentioned as secondary themes, but I think this is often things that we take for granted. We think it's things that should be there. Students should feel safe. But these students were seeing this as a specific factor supporting their well-being. Okay, so that's the secondary themes. Then there were another almost like third layer of themes. So that would be the next slide, where students were talking about the things that we know from the positive psychology literature: relationship, engagement, spiritual life, extracurricular activities. But these were not the dominant themes, and it was not mentioned by the majority of students. It was here and there. It was present in the data, but it wasn't prominent. So this was seen as opportunities, maybe leverages that we can use when we think about student well-being, that we can increase and give more richness to. Okay, the next slide is the silences in the data. One thing that was profound, that it seemed that there was very little awareness of the whole notion of internal and external locus of control, which factors were within their control to contribute to their well-being and outside. And then also the responses were often only within one or two of the domains of well-being. It was very rare to find within one response from a student a comprehensive overview of all the different well-being domains. And then another interesting silence was we had fairly extensive student protests in the years 2015-16. But for some reason in this data, it's not showing at all. It's completely absent, which was interesting for us as psychology researchers. There were some limitations to phase one. Of course, this was rapid interviews. We got authentic responses, we think, but there wasn't really opportunity for follow-up questions. The questions were asked by student field workers, and although there was some supervision of the data collection, there might have been leading questions, there might have been language barriers, and the data was only collected in the first part of the academic year. And then also being from the helping professions, most of the field workers were female, and that may have impacted on the kind of responses that we got. So those were the limitations of phase one. Now over to Tarina to tell us a little bit more about the findings from phase two of the project.
Thank you, Irma. In phase two, as the slide says, we wanted to gain deeper understanding about what well-being means to these students and how we can understand well-being from their perspective. So what we did here is to collect data via focus groups. And we worked per faculty. In other words, all the students enrolled in a specific faculty, the focus groups were centered around faculties. For example, in the Faculty of Humanities, we would have 5 to 8 students all enrolled in that faculty, and the focus group will only consist of students from the Faculty of Humanities. In the end, we had 64 focus groups, and then it was semi-structured interviews that we did. As per usual, they were audio recorded, and then we did a thematic analysis of the interviews. We can go to the next slide of the participants. I think we can skip that one because it's rather small, but just suffice to say that we had quite a nice group of students. The focus groups were also consisting of about 5 to 8 students in each group, and that created a lot of opportunity for Reach Delta to understand their views on well-being. So we can go to the next slide, where we're going to talk about themes. There are 3 main themes that we identified through the data in phase 2. And the first one is, again, like in the rapid fire interviews, the university environment and its contribution to well-being. That stood out as one of the strongest themes in these focus group discussions. The students made it very clear that the natural beauty of the surroundings of the campus were important to their well-being. They could see it when they walk. They noticed the flowers, they noticed the grass, and possibly here it makes us aware of the fact that these students often come from environments which are not beautiful and where they maybe don't have the opportunity to sit in a garden because of a lack of resources out there. So this could be possibly one of the unique features of what contributes to well-being in this specific student body. The second theme that came out, similar to the rapid fire, was what contributed to well-being was safety and security on campus. Again, points to the issue that maybe outside of campus, it is less so. So it's very important to them to feel safe and secure in campus, inside the campus, and that seems to be contributing to their well-being. The second main theme was the relational factors that are important to their well-being. Close relationships, a sense of being part of the university community, the belonging to the university community was contributing to well-being. And then again, mentors and lecturers. Mentors could be fellow students, it could be lecturers, it could be people in the residences, but these people close to the students were, again, as we know from the literature, definitely important to their well-being. We can go to the next slide, which was quite interesting to me, that the students said what contributes to their well-being is to take responsibility for that. It's not something that comes only from the university structures or the university management or the lecturers, but that they themselves have a responsibility to create well-being. And when I looked at the themes coming out, the sub-themes, it's interesting that they were talking about both the hedonic well-being and the eudaimonic facets of well-being. Making time for pleasure, having fun within all the demands of being a student, that was a way of creating their own well-being. But stronger though, there were themes relating to eudaimonic well-being, taking a step back and giving back to other people, finding a purpose in their studies. And interestingly, doing well academically. I guess if we look at the literature, it's because it creates hope and it creates agency because they're reaching goals that they set when they started out coming to university. So these were the three main themes we found in the focus groups. If we go to the next slide, there are some extracts from the themes, the data itself, some quotes. For example, I like that one where they talk about the amount of the trees, you can relax, you can breathe in and out, it creates calmness. It tells you something how the university environment contributes to that affective well-being in a sense. And then also the relational facets. Talking about a lecturer, he takes genuine interest in every single student. So that was quite obvious that people, again, create opportunities for these students to experience well-being. We can then go to the next slide. More extracts. And these are extracts illustrating how students spoke about taking responsibility for their own well-being, forcing yourself to do things you don't always feel like doing. That is like the motivational aspect. Contributing to the community and those around me, that is giving back. Academic success, so that if you do well academically, then your well-being is part of that. Again, goals, motivations are part of well-being for these students. I think this is developmentally appropriate for us to think about it, that it's not only the university, but it's the developmental phase that the students are going through, working towards finding their place in society and making things work for themselves. And in a sense, they're also taking responsibility for functioning well in a psychological sense. Good, I think we can now go to the next slide, and I'm handing back to Irma, who actually was involved in the function.
All right, so this is a picture of the field workers, the student field workers. They, in the process, also became wellbeing ambassadors, which was very wonderful for all of us involved in the process. And many of them also developed a very strong interest in this field, and hopefully we will be seeing some of them developing as researchers in addition to developing as in the helping professions. In conclusion, I think the two prominent themes was to pay attention when we think about student well-being, to think about the quality of the learning environment. Often we think of the quality of the learning environment as something separate from our psychological well-being. But the participants in this study is telling us that this is integrated and it's very closely linked to their psychological subjective well-being. And then the second theme around the role of the staff members. You know, we live in a time where staff members are often, the performance of academic staff members are evaluated in terms of their roles in research, and their role in terms of shaping the future of students is often underplayed when we think of the role of staff members. So that was the second dominant theme. And then also the findings from phase 2 was very interesting, because whereas in phase 1 we were worried about the lack of awareness of internal and external locus of control, the more in-depth discussions in phase 2 told us that there is in actual fact a stronger awareness, which is very positive. And then also the fact that students want to take responsibility for their own well-being, because they are the leaders of the future, and it's a very positive sign if they take on that ownership and also the agency for their own well-being. That's the conclusion. And then finally, this is what we believe is the first handbook of quality of life studies in African societies. Zarina has written a very excellent chapter in this book, but it's multidisciplinary, and it specifically speaks to the narratives about well-being in African societies, and also the initiatives and the solution-focused approaches that we are seeing to the challenges of life in Africa, and all the positive things that emanate from that. So that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. And just a quick question about the handbook. When did you become editor?
I became editor I was invited 3 years ago, and we worked on the book about 2 years. I met with Graciela Chonen in Borba in Portugal, where we had a meeting of 25 positive psychologists. And after that, she invited me to work on this handbook with a specific focus on Africa.
Excellent. Well, that's wonderful. And we definitely look forward to sharing and promoting this handbook, because I've received a copy and it has excellent resources. So good job, and kudos to you on your excellent work as the editor.
Thank you.
So at this point, Yvette, if you have any questions, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you. I have questions as well, so we'll let you start if you have anything.
I do have a couple of questions, actually. When you started doing the interviews, did you have to say to the students what well-being was, or did they instinctively know what it was?
No, in some instances we had to explain, but in most of the instances they immediately answered. During the field worker training, the field workers were more concerned about how do they explain it if students ask them. So we gave them the very simple definitions of the eudaimonic and hedonic definitions, but we didn't want to give them too much of that, because we wanted those responses of how they thought of it. So conceptually, it is a challenge, because you might have 2,480 different conceptualizations of the notion of well-being, but no. To answer your question, most of them just answered the question directly.
That's fantastic. My other question is almost the flip side of that. Here in the UK, we have increasingly increasing levels of mental health issues in university students. Is that something that's seen in South Africa?
Yes, definitely. I think it's a worldwide concern at the moment. And I see this project emanated from a request of the executive of our university. Increasingly, I'm seeing university leaders taking cognizance of the challenges around student well-being. On the one side, the concern for student well-being and the pressures that students need to deal with in the complex world that we live in. But on the other hand, also the role that university students will have to play in society in the future, because they are the leaders, they are the people who will keep the fabric of society together, and they need to have significant agency of their own well-being. So we have a dual responsibility, taking care of the vulnerable students, but also developing the capacity for the leaders of the future.
Thank you. I've got one more question. And I've forgotten what the question was. I'll come back to you. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, I have a couple of questions. You said there were 7 campuses of the University of Pretoria. So you had 64 participants in, in phase 2, and how many in phase 1?
We had 2,480 that we could use. There was slightly more, but some of the responses were spoiled. I think it was 2,513 interviews were conducted, of which we could use 2,480.
And were those equally spread out amongst all 7 campuses, or?
It was equally spread out on all the campuses where we have undergraduate students. So we didn't conduct interviews on, so.
And I'm just wondering if there, since the quality of the learning environment was such a huge part of the domain or response, were there different responses depending on which campus they were on, or all 7 campuses?
Very good question. Yes, there was. I still need to write about. We need to write about this. Yeah. For the remote campuses, there was some comments of students seeking increased resources, similar to what we call the Hatfield campus, which is the main campus of the university. So yes, for the remote campuses, definitely there were some disparities. Also an appreciation for the initiatives that are ongoing on the more remote campuses, but there's definitely a difference.
Excellent. And were you able to share any of this with your administration? Maybe even the facilities department, to encourage them to put a lot of emphasis on the learning environment?
Yes, we were invited by several stakeholder groups, of which first was a small group of the executive of the university when we made the presentation of the findings, and then also to different groups of deputy deans responsible for students, the student support counseling unit, the residences. So it was very open. I was actually very impressed with the openness from the top all the way down into the system to receiving these results and really listening to what the students were saying.
Wonderful. Yvette, did you remember your question?
I did, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to ask, was there a sense that the students who participated, that they were more active in their own agency for well-being, or were they when you asked them questions about well-being, were they sort of more externally focused? You know, it was the facilities, the lecturers that had the responsibilities?
In phase 1, it was much more externally focused.
Right.
In phase 2, which tells me it maybe have to do with the data collection methods. In phase 2, there was more of a balance, like Tarina said, more of a balance between internal and external.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just wondering how this presentation went at the Grenada conference, and did you receive any questions and during that presentation?
Yes, I did receive some questions specifically around the decolonization. In South Africa at the moment, there's a strong push for decolonizing the curriculum. So I got a question around that. And then also about the future of the project, what we plan to do in the future with these findings.
And how did you answer?
Well, on the first question, I think it's a very important initiative. We are in Africa, we're serving a particular population of students, but we should also acknowledge the fact that we are living in a global world where we are all connected. So preferencing certain knowledge domains is very important, but we should see it in a developmental way that is globally connected. That was on the first question. And then on the second question on the future is I would hope that we can strengthen the wellbeing interventions that speak to the findings from this study. You know, there are many things that the students were saying that the support that they are receiving at student support, academic support in the residences, it's there that we can use the findings to strengthen existing interventions, but then also perhaps to identify new opportunities where we can support student well-being in new and innovative ways.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to hearing more, especially your future research. Hopefully you can come back to an ISQOLS conference and present follow-up studies at our future conferences. Yvette, did you have any? Good. Yvette, did you have any other questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Well, with that, that was a wonderful presentation. I myself, I worked as an academic advisor at a university for about 10 years, and I know how important well-being is in terms of student success. And I think it's often overlooked by administration. You know, a lot of times we're grasping at straws and guessing as to what will promote well-being, particularly depending on the region and depending on different studies that come out, but we don't actually take time to ask the students. And so I think that's a very important and relevant topic. So thank you so much for presenting this wonderful presentation. And we'll be sharing it with the rest of our ISQOLS community in the near future. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Goodbye, Yvette. Thank you for joining us.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
All right.
Right.
So much.
Bye.
And we'll go ahead and end the meeting and stop recording. Oh, there we go.